Well, hello there friends and welcome back to my kitchen. If you're new here, my name is Emmy and many of you watching this channel like meal prepping, meal planning and recipe ideas. And one question that's come up quite a few times is budget-friendly protein recipe ideas. So in today's video, we are going to go through a couple of things that I cook on the regular. I'm going to cook up a couple of brand new recipes that I've never tried before and share them with you. So let's dive in. Hello, future editing Emmy here, hopping in quickly to say that I will be serving up these 4 protein-rich meals with some carbs on the side. Some of them will be with rice, some of them will be with mashed potato. Naturally, if you are trying to do low carb, high protein, you can replace these for any vegetables that you like. You could do cauliflower rice instead of the rice I'm gonna serve one of these dishes up with. For the tuna burgers, you could obviously serve them up with a salad or something else instead of having it in a burger bun. What I really like about these recipes is that they're so budget friendly and that you can basically pair them with anything you like. So let me stop waffling on about that and let's get into the recipes. So as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to cook up some budget-friendly proteins today, and we're going to start with a meal that I make all the time. There's no hard and fast recipe, but I will be sharing a ballpark recipe down there in the description. If you click the little more button below this video, you will see the description, and there will be a link in there for the base recipe. But it's getting pretty cold and wintry in Melbourne where I live in Australia, so it's a really great time of year for a soup or a stew and a really comforting, nourishing meal. So I'm gonna get my apron on because this is about to get messy, but let's dive in. All right, and here are all the ingredients we're gonna need for this humble stew, but I assure you it will turn out very, very tasty. Over here is my trusted Crofton brand. This is just a Dutch oven from Aldi. I actually got this for free on my local Pay It Forward Buy Nothing group, so we're going to be cooking it up in this. If you have a slow cooker, especially a slow cooker with a saute function, you could just use that. You could use an Instant Pot as well. The recipe I'll be linking below is for a stovetop version. So first here I've got 500 grams of beef mince. I buy the cheaper beef mince from Aldi. It's a 2 kilo package, and then I package it into 4 500 gram containers. It works out about $5 per 500 grams, which is pretty cheap for beef mince at the moment here in Australia. We've got a sweet potato, we've got a couple of carrots. I almost have no garlic left, so I might need to use some garlic powder as well, but I've got a little bit of garlic here. Got some onion. And then because we're making this a little bit more high protein, we're also going to be adding some lentils. Lentils is one of the highest and most affordable protein in the bean, lentil, chickpea family. So I'm going to be draining and rinsing these. Normally in this recipe, I would be using 2 cans of diced tomatoes and 1 to 2 cups, depending how much other veggies you have, of beef broth. But when I did my pulled pork, and I will link that video down below, I actually took all the liquid out of my Instant Pot, let it solidify and skimmed off all the fat. And then I froze this beautiful goodness. So this is basically like a smoky, barbecuey pulled pork juice. So I'm going to be using this plus one of these cans. I may or may not end up using the beef stock, but I have it just in case I need it. And for the seasoning, I'm going to keep it very simple here. I've got salt and pepper, I've got some bay leaves, and I've got quite a hot Thai chili from my own garden. This is dried, so it shouldn't be that spicy, but I will include it anyway just for a little bit of a kick. So the original recipe will be linked down there below, but let's get cooking. All right, so we're pretty much ready to start cooking this up, and my fan is going to get noisy, so I'll probably do a voiceover for the next little bit if I do talk to you guys. But what I wanted to say is that this is the veggies I'm using today. So I'm doing sweet potato, carrot, onion, and a little tiny bit of garlic. I've also dug out some frozen spinach that I had in my freezer, and I think I'm going to throw in 2 of these sort of frozen lumps of spinach, you'll see it later, in the soup to kind of cook together. The greatest thing about this soup is you can use anything you want. If you just want to do mince, you can. If you want to just do vegetarian, if you have some chickpeas hanging around, you could easily add that instead of lentils. You can make this vegetarian. You don't have to use beef stock, you could use whatever you felt like. So this is a great way. I often throw in, if I have like celery in the freezer that I need to use up, I will chuck that in. You could also use a chicken broth base instead of a beef broth if you wanted to. So this is super versatile and super healthy, but let's get cooking. So I brought this up to a boil and then sort of down to a simmer, and it's been simmering now for about 25-30 minutes. It's smelling amazing. It tastes really good. It's got a beautiful smoky flavor. So all I'm gonna do now is basically, we are not having this tonight, we're actually having some mashed potato and salmon that my husband's gonna cook on the barbecue. So that's cooking there in the background. So all I'm gonna do is portion this out. We're gonna have some really beautiful hearty stew for the week. Now I love a stew instead of a soup because you actually don't need, my cat is playing with her toys downstairs. One thing that I love about a stew instead of a soup is that you don't need to have bread with it. You can literally have it just like this. The lentils are beautiful and tender, and this is going to be really tasty. I'm going to show you once I've dished this up. Quick intermission here talking about grocery budgets. I will be doing a dedicated full video with a grocery budget template and that sort of stuff and how you can set it up, or rather how I've set it up and used it for years. If you're interested in that, make sure you are subscribed via the button below this video so you don't miss it when I release that in probably a couple of weeks time from you watching this. But I wanted to touch quickly on the concept of being frugal. To me, I have always been pretty smart with my money. I love to travel. There's a heck of a lot of things that I love in this world. And spending money on groceries is, yes, I will sometimes go to like our local butcher and buy some really good quality meat. But more than anything, I'm really keen to use what I have wisely. Being a bit of a minimalist, I have a whole other YouTube channel if you're interested in minimalism and decluttering and that kind of stuff. I will link that down below this video if you want to check that out. But I think the key thing when it comes to being frugal is just being smart and resourceful with your money and being very deliberate where you spend your money. I still splurge. I go to shows, I go to the movies, I go out for cocktails, but I'm smart about when and with whom and how I do that. And a really big driver for me in this channel is to make healthy food as available as possible to as many people as possible. And you guys watching really do help the channel so much with your comments and by subscribing. But being frugal is not a bad thing. To me, being frugal is something that I'm really proud of. And for me, it taps into creativity, resourcefulness, and making the most of what you have, whether it's a lot or a little. Being frugal also means that I can volunteer and do other things that I'm really interested in outside of work and outside of running this channel. So if you have a complex relationship with the word frugal or frugality, it's totally okay to be frugal, and it does not mean that you never have fun, that you never splurge, that you don't give gifts to friends and family and people you care about. It just means that you're a bit smart about how you spend that money. That's all. Anyway, back to the recipes. Now, I make meatballs all the time. I'm Swedish, so I make Swedish meatballs, but I never make chicken meatballs before. So I'm starting with some clearance chicken mince I picked up. I think it was like $7 for a kilo. We got egg, we got some olive oil. We're gonna need some breadcrumbs. I'm using a little bit less actually than the recipe calls for. And then we're just gonna use some seasonings. This is a really simple recipe. I've never made it before, but I thought it'd be an interesting one to do. Now, when I make meatballs, and you'll see this in my Swedish meatball recipe coming up in a few weeks, I normally do soak the breadcrumbs just a little bit in some milk or some water. It can just help make it a little bit easier to mix. So I'm just adding a tiny bit of water here and putting that aside. And then in my experience, the only way to make meatballs is actually to get your hands a little bit dirty. So take off any jewelry, obviously, and then get your ingredients mixed and just get your hands in there. It's really the only way I find. If you have particularly sticky texture, these meatballs ended up being a little bit on the wet side. So I did add a little bit more dry breadcrumbs off camera a little bit later as I was rolling these balls up. But overall, it was a really easy recipe to make up. I had some other things going in the oven for dinner that evening. But like I said, this was meat that I bought on clearance, so I had to kind of cook it up within the date range because I'd already defrosted it. So yeah, it was really simple as well. Normally with my other meatballs, I will fry them in a pan, but with these ones, the recipe actually called for just baking them in the oven, which is obviously a lot quicker, so that's totally fine. So I've got my oven preheating there, and we're just going to cook these according to the recipe instructions, which will be linked down below this video. I can't remember exactly how long I cooked them for, but I just followed the instructions, and I did cut that one of them through just to make sure it was actually cooked in the middle. They turned out really, really tasty. And so the following day, I cooked up some mashed potato to go with them, and I made a really simple tomato sauce. I didn't have any pasta sauce in the house, believe it or not. So I used some diced tomato, fresh tomato, a little bit of herbs from my garden, etc. And I've got my potatoes there on the side, but you can obviously serve it with whatever you like. And then I just added 1 can of diced tomatoes, some tomato puree, and my herbs, and I just let that simmer on the stove for a little bit. A very humble sauce, but it actually turned out really, really tasty. And I think I will definitely be adding chicken meatballs to the menu in our house more often. It's a really easy thing that you can batch prep and prepare in advance. You could freeze them, and I think I paid about $7 at Aldi for 1 kilo of chicken mince on clearance, so it was pretty good. Now today's meal, I've got most of the ingredients lined up here, and I'm going to share them with you in just a second, but the basis of today is chickpeas and tofu. These are budget friendly. I think a can of chickpeas at Aldi or Woolies or Coles is around about $1 at the moment. It's pretty inexpensive, and per 100 grams you get 6.6 grams of protein. So this can is 420 grams, so just over 400. So that's pretty good, 6.6 times 4, so that's 25 grams-ish of protein just for this can. And this here is the firm tofu from Aldi. If you haven't made tofu before and you have a bit of a texture issue with tofu, I highly recommend you try oven baked tofu. I've done it here on the channel before. In that little description box below this video, I will link one of those videos so you can check it out. But the key to cooking with tofu, if you have a texture problem, is to get a nice crunch to it. I'm going to do my very best in today's video. But before we dive in, I just wanted to say that for this 450 gram pack, this has almost 15 grams of protein per 100 grams. So that means, what have we got? So that's 60 grams, over 60 grams of protein in this block here. And this is also super budget friendly. I reckon last time I went to Aldi, which is normally where I buy this, I think it was $2.59, so $2.59. So for just a couple of bucks, we're gonna get a pretty good protein mix. Now, if you have kids and they don't like this sort of stuff and this won't work for you, fine, go ahead, wait for one of the other recipes. I do have a lot of variety recipes coming up in this video, but let's get cooking a simple recipe that I found. Full disclosure, it's the first time I'm making it, so let's see how it turns out. All right, and here are our ingredients for this meal. As always, I will be linking the recipe that I've drawn the inspiration from down in the description box. But this is basically like a smoky tofu tortilla. So you're gonna need flour tortillas or taco type things if you wanna make it as per the recipe. I'm actually gonna serve mine over rice today. So I'm gonna get the rice, this is just plain white rice. I'm gonna get that cooking in a second. But the key ingredients that we're gonna need today is our tofu. The recipe calls for black beans, I think, or kidney beans. I'm a bit of a rebel. I'm not going to use what's in the recipe because I didn't have any. So we're using chickpeas. I'm sure it'll turn out fine. I've got some brown sugar. I've got some capsicum. I found a really good deal at Aldi the other day. These are on the last sort of stretch, so I need to cook them up. But I found a really good deal with a whole net of these at Aldi for really cheap, so we're using those. The recipe calls for 2 onions. I'm not a huge onion fan, so I'm going to stick to 1. A bunch of coriander from my garden. I've got lots more where that came from, and some cherry tomatoes. And then for seasonings, we're just going for smoked paprika, cumin, salt, and pepper. Now the recipe calls for cooking these bits up first and then cooking the tofu, but knowing myself and knowing how important tofu texture is to me, I'm actually gonna get some of the moisture out of this. I'll show you how I do that, and then I'm going to cook this up first to get a bit of crunch on it, and then I'm going to cook up the rest. So let's get cooking. From time to time I do get questions about how I find recipes, and the main thing I do is I just hop into Google, who happens to be the search engine I use most often, and I put in the ingredient and the supporting ingredients. So in this case, I put in tofu and capsicum, or you could put bell peppers or whatever you call it in the part of the world where you live. Here in Australia, we call it capsicum. So I put in those 2 ingredients and this recipe sort of came up and I was keen to try it. So I think quite often, you just have to look around, and then I always bookmark something that I'm interested in cooking, and whether I like it or not, I will then put it into my recipe folder. I'm happy to do a whole separate video on how I curate in a digital format, how I curate all my favorite recipes. So let me know down there in the comments if that's something you would like to see. The other thing I want to say is that I'm a bit of a recipe rebel. I don't follow recipes to the T. Today's example is a really great example. The recipe called for black beans or kidney beans, and a lot of people would go, oh dang it, I don't have those ingredients, I'm gonna have to cook that another time. Emmy, and if you're a fellow rebel, let me know down in the comments below. I will take the thing in my pantry, my fridge, my freezer that most closely resembles the thing that I'm trying to make, and I'll have a go. Now, if sometimes the flavor isn't quite right, I will absolutely go back and cook the recipe again with the right ingredients in the future. But you will see it here time and time again on the channel that I use a recipe as a base. and then modify that because I wasn't organized enough. Anyway, enough waffling. Let's start cooking up today's meal. Okay, so while I was cutting up the vegetables, the tofu has now been sitting for probably about 15 minutes or so. I was doing a bit of work in between, and you can see here, you'd see even more on a paper towel how much liquid we've gotten out of the tofu. But if you like crunchy tofu, this is the trick. I typically use paper towel, as you might have seen in other videos, but I am trying to reduce my waste a little bit. So here are our tofu blocks. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and cut this up. And what I'm gonna do, which is different from the recipe, is that I'm gonna go ahead and cut this up, toss it in a little bit of oil, and I'm gonna toss it in this smoky paprika because this is plain tofu, it's not pre-seasoned with anything. And then I'm gonna fry that up with a little bit of oil first before I add my other ingredients. So let's get this ready. Okay, so that's our tofu done. Now I want a really nice smoky paprika flavor, so I'm gonna go pretty heavy on this, and I'm gonna be tossing it around a little bit. The recipe calls for smoky tofu that's already sort of seasoned, and you can obviously marinate your tofu. I was a bit too lazy, so I didn't do that. So we're just gonna mix this up now, and then I'm gonna fry it up in my fry pan with some oil before I add this other stuff. All right, there we go. This smells really nice and smoky, and I think we're ready to just get some hot oil in a pan and cook this up first. And when you've gotten enough water out of tofu, especially when you cook with it for a few times, you'll start to feel that it's no longer that sort of slimy, spongy thing, which I know some people have texture issues with. So let's get this cooking. All right, friends, moment of truth here. We are gonna dig into this beautiful plate. This is a pretty generous lunch size serve for me, and back there, I'll show you a close up, but I have got so much food left. This is easily, if you use a 450 gram tofu block and the chickpeas or the beans or whatever you end up using, this is easily 6 serves, maybe more, depending how rice heavy you go. Now, I left it a little bit saucy, so I used fresh cherry tomatoes, which meant I added a little bit of water. If you get the canned tomatoes, you need about 400 ml worth of liquid. But you may then, if you're having it in like a taco or fajita style thing, you may just want to get rid of a little more of the liquid. But this is smelling so good. I haven't added anything onto this, so let's just try it first. Really good flavors. Yum. I'm gonna enjoy this. Now, I didn't add any extra chili or any extra heat, so my go-to for dishes like this is some kind of a hot sauce, or even better, just some chili flakes. So I'm gonna add a little bit of chili flakes up top here. You would have seen as well that I'm serving this up with some delicious avocado. This is about a quarter of a large-ish avocado. You can obviously serve it up with whatever you prefer. This is really tasty. I will absolutely be making this again, and I look forward to see how my husband likes it. It serves really well over rice. Maybe you could do quinoa as well if you are gluten-free and you're looking for budget options. But I'm gonna be enjoying this now. All right, so tonight's dinner is gonna be tuna burgers. I found a recipe online. I will link it below this video, but I've got a large can of tuna here. I've got a little bit of breadcrumbs. The recipe called for 1.5 cups, but I'm gonna start with 1/2 cup and see how the texture works out. The recipe also calls for mayonnaise, but you know me, I can never follow a recipe exactly. So this is actually some cottage cheese that I had that I needed to use up, so we're gonna use that. It calls for an egg, slightly beaten, so I'm gonna crack that egg. And then we've got some, I think this is about 2 and a bit stalks of celery. And for seasoning, we're just doing salt. I'm gonna use a bit of white pepper and a little bit of dill. And then the recipe calls for like a mayonnaise type dressing, but this is my kind of Greek style yogurt that I make myself. So I'm gonna make a bit of a dill lemon sauce to go with them. Now I'm gonna serve this up with potato wedges today, which are actually just cooking up in the oven here. But if you wanted sort of a high protein type meal, you could obviously do sweet potato fries instead. You could serve these tuna burgers up with the salad or something like that. So it's really just we're gonna mix them up into kind of burger patties and then fry them. So you could serve them up however you like. And here we've got a very simple yogurt dressing. It's just my Greek style yogurt with some cracked black pepper, some dill. I just get, the supermarket one, and some salt. And then I've squeezed one of my little lemons. And let's see if I can do this one-handed. Woo! All right, so we're gonna stir that up. I might need to add some more yogurt, and then we're gonna put that in the fridge whilst I fry these boys up. So I added probably another tablespoon or so of yogurt, and now I'm gonna store this in the fridge while I cook these guys up. It'll probably take me about 15-20 minutes to cook them, so this will settle nicely in the fridge. All right, so I wanted to come back with a verdict on the 4 dishes that we cooked this week. The stew is one that I make all the time here on the channel. You would have seen it in other videos in the past. But it really, using the liquid from the pulled pork that I froze really took that dish to the next level. My husband really loved it and we were both, it was just so beautifully rich and amazing. And the flavors were quite different because of that kind of barbecue sauce and that flavor. So that one we both really liked. We both really liked the tuna burgers. I will absolutely be making them again and varying up the ingredients. Really good option as well because tuna where I live is quite a bit cheaper than mince or beef mince or whatever. So that was really good. I quite liked the smoky tofu chickpea dish. My husband, not so much. He had it, but he's not as big a fan as I am of tofu and plant-based meals. So I really like that one. I'll probably make it again, but maybe just for me. And the chicken meatballs I really liked as well. Chicken mince is so much cheaper, at least where I live, compared to a lot of other types of mince. So I will definitely be making that one again. I will have to manage it because they were a little bit on the wet side when I cooked them in the oven. So next time I might just put a little bit less liquid in with the breadcrumbs than I normally would, or maybe even just use dry breadcrumbs. But anyway, all these recipes are really budget friendly. I hope you give them a go. They will all be linked down there below in the description box. If you just click on the little more text underneath this video, you'll find them all there. I hope you enjoy cooking these up and let me know what you serve them with and what worked really well for you and for your family. All the best, and I look forward to see you in my next video.